Hi there. I listen to your videos often and wanted to share my own experiences with you. While I will not be giving my true name, I do give full permission to share these stories. To begin, I'm not a fearful person in the normal sense. I'm one of those people that laughs at horror movies and is completely nonplussed about blood and the smell of rotting flesh, mostly from handling long dead animals. Nor do I have trouble telling the difference between reality and imaginary things in the shadows. With all that being said, here are a few of the weirdest experiences I have ever had. I was living in Indiana as a Mormon missionary at the time. Hate me if you must for it, I don't really care. For those who don't know, being a missionary involves going door to door and offering to discuss our religious beliefs in the hopes of helping people to decide on their own that they want to come to church with us. This makes us very unpopular, despite trying our hardest to be as kind as possible to everyone we meet. Most often, it's just harsh words or glares, but on occasion, we've had dogs turned on us, and on 2 different occasions, had people actively try to run us down with their cars, and more than once, had guns pointed at me. However, there were only 2 times I felt true fear while I was there, and neither of them are as easy to explain as a simple gun to the head. The first time was when I lived above an animal hospital. The small apartment was connected to an attic by a floating hallway that overlooked an open reception area. Exercise equipment and other random supplies were kept there. Nothing medical, just advertisement stands for flea collars and other junk nobody needed. So we would cross the bridge often. One particular evening, I was moving the stationary bicycle back out onto the floating hallway. I noticed the door to the attic was open. A figure stood in the shadows behind the door. It's strange, but there are moments when you instantly know that what you are seeing is very real, but also decidedly not human. This creature raised a long, clawed hand and pulled the door open wider. Its body was a lifeless gray color with only a dirty gray gown that covered it from its shoulders to its knees. The creature's hands were long claws that reached down to its knees, despite the rest of its proportions being that of your average, if emaciated, human woman. Long hair fell lifelessly from her head that was both full but very thin and wispy. Most of her face was covered by a saber-toothed cat skull, leaving only her chin exposed beneath the teeth. Her entire being was dull, faded, almost like she could barely manage to exist. The only color were its red eyes, full of hatred and entirely devoid of light. I stood there trying to decide how to respond to the thing in front of me when she raised her clawed hand to the skull in a shushing sign, then pulled the door further open. I made my choice and noped out of there, flinging myself back through the door right behind me and grabbing a knife from the kitchen. I knew full well that a knife was useless, but I didn't care. The altercation probably lasted all of 10 seconds, but fundamentally changed my life. For the next few days, I would notice odd shadows and strange motion in my peripheral vision. She was starting to follow me. Then, a full week after the event, I temporarily worked overnight in a different area with another missionary. While I was gone, the 4 missionaries still at the apartment woke up in the middle of the night to strange noises and an oppressing sense of danger. The 4 of them prayed as a group to force it away. It left by way of a thick metal door, nearly tearing it from its hinges, despite the fact that it had been deadbolted at the time. She never came back after that, but I know she was there for me specifically. The look in her eyes was clear. We had known each other in the time before this world, and she was angry for not choosing her side. I believe this was during the First War when Satan and his followers were cast from heaven. Not many people realize we were there, and even fewer realize we made enemies because of it. Later on in my mission, a man practically dragged us into his house begging for an exorcism. It's hard to describe, but this house was wrong and filled with evil. Not the "this is a bad place to be" wrong, but an "abandon all hope, ye who enter here" kind of wrong. My missionary companion turned pale the moment he stepped inside, and I felt like vomiting the moment my foot touched the floor. There was a short hallway that had its blinds wide open, yet we could see nothing of the hallway itself because of a literal darkness filling the space. We explained the difference from our perspective between an exorcism, which we see as fake, or at least not of God, and a blessing that drives spirits from a home. After explaining, we knelt down and gave the blessing. Within minutes, the house became considerably brighter, and I went from having to hold down vomit to just a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. We promised to come back the next morning to talk with them further and help keep the evil away. Less than 12 hours later, we were back on their front porch, and already we could tell it was back with friends. My missionary companion turned even paler and broke out into a cold sweat when we entered, but I was bent double when something struck me in the chest, hard enough to knock the wind out of me and almost knocked me off my feet. We prayed over the house again and managed to force the demons out once again. That was when we found how they got there in the first place. The son of the family had spent the night watching an Exorcist movie marathon while high on drugs and had called out for the demons on a Ouija board to try and learn the creature's name. None of the family was willing to change, and we were unable to do anything to help them further. It doesn't matter how many times you force them out if all you're gonna do is let them right back in the next day. The last experience I want to share is far less disturbing than the other two, but all the stranger because of it. So, I work in a bakery making donuts from 1 a.m. until 7 a.m., and this place is haunted. Everything from strange noises to lights flickering on and off to buckets and toppings floating between shelves when no one's looking. In all honesty, though, it was just moderately annoying, not scary, and we all learned to live with it most of the time. That was until the second week of October, when I was alone at 3 a.m. on a cloudy night. The ghosts were generally at their most active this time of year, and during the hours of 1 to 4 a.m. was when most of the strange activity happened. The last few days in particular had been increasingly active compared to what we would normally experience. This Thursday was shaping up to have a surprising and frustrating amount of activity. The door chimes ringing every 10 minutes, then every 5 without stopping, larger and heavier objects moving around, and even going so far as to mess with the music. This was extremely out of character, as we had a general understanding with the ghosts not to mess with the food or equipment. The ghosts liked us to acknowledge them, but didn't want to hurt the business. I guess even spirits support free enterprise. The radio suddenly shut off completely, and I moved to turn it back on when the electronic bell chimed faster than it should have been able to, with the sounds beginning to overlap themselves. How an electronic doorbell was able to do this is still a mystery to me. The radio refused to turn back on, and I decided to forget about it and suffer through the silence of my thoughts. That was when I saw what was outside. Skeletons filled the parking lot and street, shuffling slowly between the bushes and light posts. I stared, trying to decide if they were real or not, as the world outside had an almost underwater look to it. It felt like the other side of the glass was a different world entirely, one where I did not want to be. The ghosts had gone completely silent now. One of the skeletons approached the shop, and I ducked back into the kitchen, resolving to avoid attracting any attention from the creatures outside, and deciding as long as it was outside, it was not my problem. Yet. The last I saw of the dark window was the creature placing its bony and dirty hands on the glass, trying to see in. The doors rattled for several minutes, but I did my best to ignore them and kept working in silence, trying not to make much noise so I could listen for anything breaking. I've no idea how long it searched for me, as I stayed back in the kitchen for the next hour, pushing off going up front as long as I could. When I finally did, it was gone, and my brother, who was a fellow employee, was unlocking the doors. He and I tried to laugh off the story when I told him, but as the sun rose, we noticed fresh prints on the doors and windows, all on the outside, all thin and extremely bony. Hundreds of handprints that sprang up from nowhere. The glass had been clean yesterday. I don't know if the skeletons were malevolent or curious, but I'd rather not find out. What I do know is that the ghosts that always wanted to scare and annoy us were absolutely terrified of them, and that alone was enough to make me avoid them.